Some battles require no gunfire, and the most dangerous warriors are those who know when to wait. This truth became our reality when we moved into Greenbryer Estates, a neighborhood that promised tranquility but delivered tyranny. Behind the perfectly manicured lawns and coordinated mailboxes lurked an oppressive homeowners association that ruled with an iron fist wrapped in pastel-colored bylaws. My wife Lena, a former special operative who traded classified missions for domestic life, immediately sensed the wrongness beneath the surface. Karinette, the HOA president, patrolled our streets like a suburban dictator, clipboard in hand and power-drunk volunteers at her beck and call. She took particular interest in our family, perhaps sensing in Lena something dangerous, a calm resistance that wouldn't bend to arbitrary rules. What Karinette couldn't have known was that Lena's placid exterior masked a tactical mind that had overthrown actual dictators. I watched in quiet amazement as my wife methodically documented every violation notice, every intrusion, building a case with the precision that once made her legendary in circles I'm not allowed to name. When Agent Walker from the Department of Justice finally appeared at that fateful confrontation, I wasn't surprised. Lena hadn't just been protecting our home, she'd been meticulously dismantling an entire corrupt system from within, proving once again that true power lies not with those who shout the loudest, but with those patient enough to wait for the perfect moment to strike. We arrived at Greenbryer Estates on a perfect spring morning, the kind of day that seems manufactured specifically for real estate brochures. Moving trucks lined our freshly paved driveway as Lena and I took in the view of our new home, a handsome colonial with crisp white trim and a lawn that appeared to have been measured with scientific precision. Neighbors smiled and waved from their equally immaculate properties, and I remember thinking we had finally found our slice of suburban paradise after years of Lena's mysterious deployments and my constant relocations. The welcoming committee arrived within hours, 3 women with identical highlights and practiced smiles, bearing a gift basket and a binder thick enough to rival government classified documents. The Greenbryer Homeowners Association guidelines, explained the apparent leader, Karinette, with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Everything you need to know about being a proper part of our community. Lena accepted the binder with the same neutral expression she perfected during interrogations, while I naively thanked them for their thoroughness. That night, as we unpacked boxes in our living room, Lena flipped through the HOA Bible with increasing concern. "Listen to this," she said, her voice calm but eyes alert. Section 47.3, holiday decorations may only be displayed during the approved 2-week window before and 3 days after the holiday in question. Violations subject to $75 fine per day. Section 52.1, trash bins must be placed exactly 12 inches from the curb and removed within 4 hours of collection. Violations subject to $50 fine. I laughed, assuming these were worst-case provisions that would never be enforced. 3 days later, we received our first violation notice for unauthorized lawn hydration. We had watered our grass on a Tuesday instead of a Monday or Thursday. The $25 fine seemed absurd but easier to pay than fight. The second notice came a week later when our mailbox was deemed improperly aligned with the street by approximately 1.5 degrees. As the fines accumulated, the true nature of Greenbryer Estates revealed itself beneath the picturesque facade. Children received citations for drawing with sidewalk chalk, classified as unauthorized modification of community walkways. One elderly neighbor had his hand-carved bird feeder forcibly removed as an unapproved aerial ornament. The HOA's reach extended into every aspect of daily life, and at its center was Karinette, who patrolled the neighborhood in her pristine white SUV, documenting infractions with the fervor of a tax auditor working on commission. We learned quickly that resistance was met with escalation. The Davenports down the street questioned a $150 fine for lawn discoloration during a record drought, only to find themselves subject to daily inspections that resulted in thousands more in penalties. The community existed in a state of quiet submission, with neighbors avoiding eye contact during HOA meetings where Karinette and her board approved ever more restrictive regulations without meaningful opposition. Things took a dramatic turn when the HOA newsletter announced the formation of the Greenbryer Civil Enforcement Division. What had been a group of clipboard-wielding busybodies transformed overnight into something resembling a paramilitary organization. Men and women in khaki pants and dark green polo shirts bearing the Greenbryer insignia began patrolling the streets, first in golf carts, then in vehicles marked to resemble police cruisers. They carried fake badges, telescoping batons, and pepper spray, claiming to have community authority to enforce HOA regulations. Surveillance cameras appeared on street corners, ostensibly for community safety, but their lenses seemed perpetually angled toward homes with prior violations. The enforcement division took measurements of grass height with rulers, photographed cars parked in driveways, and occasionally peered through windows to check for unapproved window treatments. This wasn't just overzealous community management, it was harassment sanctioned by regulations most residents had never fully read. Karinette seemed to take particular interest in our household after Lena questioned the legal authority of these self-appointed officers at a community meeting. "Mrs. Montgomery," Karinette had said with a saccharine smile, "perhaps your unique background has given you unrealistic expectations of suburban living. Here at Greenbryer, we prioritize order and conformity for everyone's benefit." The veiled reference to Lena's classified past sent a chill through me, but Lena merely nodded and said nothing more. That night, I found her at the kitchen table, organizing documentation of every HOA interaction we'd had since moving in. "What are you doing?" I asked, recognizing the methodical approach she took to mission planning in her former life. "Building a case," she replied without looking up. "They've overplayed their hand." While others raged impotently or submitted meekly, Lena approached the situation with calculating patience. She installed our own discrete security cameras, documenting the Civil Enforcement Division trespassing repeatedly on our property. She began networking with other homeowners, collecting their experiences and violation notices, building a comprehensive picture of HOA overreach. Most evenings, she could be found reviewing statutes and regulations with the same intensity she once applied to studying enemy fortifications. What neighbors saw as a quiet homemaker was actually a tactical operator gathering intelligence. I noticed subtle changes around the neighborhood too, Lena having hushed conversations with the Wilsons, whose children had been banned from playing basketball in their own driveway, meeting the Harrisons, whose garden gnome collection had resulted in $2,300 in accumulated fines, consoling Mrs. Abernathy, whose wheelchair ramp had been deemed architecturally inconsistent despite her mobility needs. I recognized the pattern from watching Lena work in her previous career. She was building a coalition, identifying allies, and preparing resources. Occasionally, she would receive calls that required privacy, speaking in coded phrases I pretended not to recognize. Former teammates were being consulted, advice sought from specialists. One night, I overheard her say, "No, we're not extracting yet. Just documenting until we have enough to ensure complete structural collapse." When I questioned her later, she simply smiled and said, "Some oppressive regimes require a bureaucratic approach to dismantle." As Karinette's enforcement squad became more aggressive, Lena became more serene. When they issued a $500 fine because our garage door had been left open for 37 minutes, exceeding the 30-minute maximum, Lena thanked the enforcement officer and offered him homemade cookies. When they demanded we replace our entire fence because it was 2 shades darker than approved brown, she politely requested the color sample card to ensure compliance. Her calm compliance seemed to infuriate Karinette, who escalated her targeting of our home. What she couldn't see was the methodical documentation Lena maintained of every interaction, every violation notice, every trespass. Our basement had transformed into an operations center, with maps of the neighborhood marking enforcement patterns, tables of financial data showing the flow of violation money, and walls covered with photos and documents. Lena had identified that the HOA's operating license had expired 16 months earlier, discovered financial irregularities in their accounting, and documented dozens of instances where the enforcement division had broken actual laws while enforcing imaginary ones. While Karinette played at being a neighborhood dictator, my wife was orchestrating a complete systemic dismantling of her power structure, and no one, not even me, knew exactly when or how the final move would come. The confrontation that had been brewing for months finally erupted on a Tuesday evening as Lena tended to her garden, an activity that had already earned us 3 separate violations for unauthorized plant height variations. 2 Greenbryer enforcement officers approached our property line, one filming with his phone while the other clutched a citation clipboard. Mrs. Montgomery, the larger one, called out, "You've been documented using non-approved gardening implements and exceeding the permitted 30-minute outdoor maintenance window." Lena straightened up slowly, soil still clinging to her gloved hands. "Good evening, gentlemen. I believe the bylaws allow for 45 minutes of garden maintenance on weekdays, and my trowel is from the approved vendor list. The calm correction seemed to infuriate the officer, whose face flushed beneath his ridiculous tactical sunglasses. You've been warned repeatedly about your attitude. The HOA board has authorized escalated enforcement measures for repeat offenders like yourself. What happened next occurred with such swift precision that I barely processed it in real time. The officer unclipped something from his belt, a civilian taser, and pointed it directly at my wife. This is your final warning to comply with all directives, he barked, his voice cracking slightly. Lena remained perfectly still, her expression unchanged. Sir, you're currently committing assault with a weapon, trespassing, and impersonating security personnel. I would suggest you lower that device immediately. The taser fired with a sharp crack, the probe striking Lena in the abdomen. She dropped to one knee, her body convulsing momentarily from the electrical current. I started forward from the porch, but Lena's raised hand stopped me, a signal I recognized from years of watching her operate. This had been anticipated. The enforcement officer looked momentarily shocked at his own action, then seemingly emboldened, stepped forward and deployed the taser a second time. This is what happens when you question authority in Greenbryer, he snarled. What he failed to notice was the tiny red dots that had appeared on his chest and that of his partner, pinpoint laser sights that seemed to materialize from nowhere. I would strongly advise against a third deployment, came a calm voice from behind our hedge. Four figures emerged from concealed positions around our property, men and women with the quiet, efficient bearing that I recognized immediately as Lena's former teammates. They wore civilian clothes but moved with unmistakable purpose, each holding compact, professional-grade laser sighting modules. No weapons were visible, but the implication was clear enough to freeze the enforcement officers in place. "What the hell is this?" stammered the one still holding the taser. "This," said a new voice, "is the conclusion of an ongoing federal investigation." A tall man in a charcoal suit approached from the street, flanked by two others in similar attire. He displayed credentials that made the blood drain from the officers' faces. Special Agent Walker, Department of Justice. The individuals you just assaulted twice with an electroshock weapon is a former federal agent, and you've been under surveillance since February. The next few hours unfolded like a perfectly choreographed operation. DOJ agents swarmed the neighborhood, simultaneous warrants were served at multiple locations, including Karinette's home and the HOA office. I helped Lena inside while she recovered from the taser deployment, a risk she had apparently calculated and accepted as part of her strategy. "You knew this would happen?" I asked, applying cool compresses to where the barbs had struck her. "Not specifically this," she admitted, "but I knew they would escalate to physical intimidation eventually. Petty tyrants always do. We just needed to document it happening under the right circumstances." By nightfall, the full scope of Lena's operation became clear. Agent Walker sat at our dining room table, reviewing the evidence Lena had compiled. "Quite impressive," he noted. "We've been building our own case against Greenbryer for some time, but your documentation accelerated things considerably." The federal investigation had revealed that Greenbrier's HOA had been operating without a valid license for 16 months, making all fines collected during that period legally fraudulent. The Enforcement Division had been engaging in racketeering, intimidation, and civil rights violations. Most damning of all, financial records showed over $100,000 in homeowner fines diverted to personal accounts controlled by Karinette and board members. The moment they deployed weapons against residents, this moved from a civil matter to a federal crime, Walker explained. "Your wife's unique background and connections helped ensure we were in position when it happened." Karinette and 6 enforcement officers were taken into custody that night, charged with multiple felonies. The HOA board was dissolved by emergency court order, and all outstanding fines were invalidated. The news spread through Greenbryer like wildfire, residents emerging from their homes in disbelief as the self-appointed neighborhood dictator was led away in handcuffs, still protesting about property values and community standards. An emergency community meeting was called 3 days later at the clubhouse. Nearly every household attended, many neighbors meeting properly for the first time without the oppressive shadow of HOA surveillance. Agent Walker provided a brief overview of the federal charges and the illegal operation that had been masquerading as legitimate community governance. Going forward, he explained, you have options as homeowners. You can form a new association with proper licensing and oversight, or you can operate independently under county regulations. When nominations were opened for an interim board to handle the transition, the first name proposed was Lena's. Despite her protests, the vote was unanimous. The community had recognized who had truly been protecting their interests. Her first act as interim chair was to ceremoniously shred the infamous rulebook, drawing cheers from everyone present. Greenbryer doesn't need 300 pages of restrictions and penalties, she announced. We need 3 principles: respect for each other, transparency in operations, and trust in our community. No more fines, no more citations, no more patrols. Just neighbors looking out for each other. In the weeks that followed, the transformation was remarkable. Children played freely in front yards again. Gardens bloomed with individuality. The community organized voluntary beautification projects and block parties. When issues arose between neighbors, they were handled through conversation rather than citation. The surveillance cameras came down, replaced by community bulletin boards. Our home became a hub of neighborhood activity, with Lena guiding the development of a minimal, sensible framework for community governance based on her experience in rebuilding civil structures in conflict zones. You never cease to amaze me, I told her one evening as we sat on our front porch, a formerly prohibited activity now reclaimed as a neighborhood tradition. All those years I thought I was married to an operative who became a homemaker, but it turns out I'm married to a silent storm who dismantles entire systems of oppression. Lena smiled, watching children ride bikes freely down the street. Power based on fear always destroys itself eventually. The trick is creating the right circumstances for its collapse while being ready to build something better in its place. The lesson of Greenbryer Estates spread beyond our neighborhood as similar HOA abuses were uncovered across the country. Lena was invited to consult on community governance reform, bringing her unique perspective on how power should serve rather than subjugate. But for us, the greatest victory was simpler: a community built on mutual respect rather than fear, where rules existed to support rather than control, and where a once divided collection of houses had become a true neighborhood. As for Karinette and her enforcers, their legal troubles had only begun. Civil suits from homeowners would ensure they paid back far more than the $100,000 they had extorted. The Pastel Dictator had learned what governments and warlords before her had discovered at Lena's hands: true power is not found in making others small, but in the patient, strategic dismantling of those who forget that authority without legitimacy is just bullying with a clipboard.